Good afternoon, Christy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am rocking and rolling, aren't we?
I know. So I say with that musical intro, yeah, I feel like I should be playing an air guitar or something.
I have no idea. I was just throwing spaghetti at the wall at that point. Welcome to the podcast today. So glad you're with us. I just want to say this really quickly to get it out of the way. Unfortunately, it's going to be a fairly short one this morning. I overbooked. I felt so bad. I've been apologizing to Christy, but we are going to come back on the, let me make sure I get the right date.
20th, right? Or
27th.
See, I'm glad you said something.
27th.
Got it.
So we'll be back on the 27th to do a part 2 of what we're going to do here today, because what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw up Christy's blog here in a second, but I do want to say this before we get started, because you and I were talking about this before we got on.
Right.
So it's so weird, the things that we agree on.
I know.
And you and I have both written blogs lately that we agreed with, and my blog was on the just ridiculous nature of this Governor Stitt and his appointments and this whole crony capitalist garbage, not accountable stuff that's going on.
Absolutely.
And yours, you've written one about the jail. Well, several about that. You've written a series about it.
Yeah, a couple about the jail, yeah.
And real quick, go over the one you just wrote. That was so good.
The one on the jail?
Yeah, the one where you were talking about the different programs and how.
Yeah. I had I first attended a town hall meeting that Jason Lowe, so he's the county commissioner for, I think, CD1. He did a town hall and they brought up some of those folks. Remerge, there was the diversion hub and some others. I had never heard of those. And so what I thought was really interesting is when I went to a subsequent town hall where he was invited and he was supposed to come and he didn't. But there were other folks there that were talking about looking at the expansion of some of these programs, diversion, and actually trying to work on reducing the population. And I think it's one of those things, it happens to be a subject that I've always been really interested in. I did papers on it in college. It wasn't my degree field, but it was just something that's always very interested in. And there's a lot of good information out there on, investing in those types of programs where we're looking at things to really try to help create folks that are productive members of society versus, just warehousing bodies, which I don't know that they've provided. And if they have, I am all ears. If they've provided any other alternatives versus we need $1 billion to build a new jail.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to throw up her Substack right now, Jen Expletives, so that you can see where to go. So if you look for, it's called Jen Expletives on Substack.
Mm-hmm.
I just really, go to her Substack and then totally read the thing about the jail, because if you're at all a person who would like to make sure our tax dollars are spent wisely and appropriately, you have to read that article. It was excellent. I mean, hands down. So we agree on that, but then you and I are not at all agreeing on the Freedom Caucus.
Dang it.
We are nowhere close on that.
I know.
Okay, so let's talk about it, because that's what we're here to do, is to talk about it. So let me do one thing quickly so that people can see what we're talking. So I don't have to go, I've got my glasses on and I can't see what we're talking about.
I'm the same. I'm gonna I need to go get new glasses, actually.
Well, hold on. Let me make it just a little bit bigger. There. Is it easier to see now?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I don't know why our names are over our faces today.
I don't know.
I don't know either. That's very weird. So we're going to roll with it, because I don't know what to do with it at this point anyway.
That's right.
Okay. So you wrote this article and you and I were just like, we must have had like 16 different conversations about it.
We did.
All right. So I want you to tell me why it is. Let's start here. Why is it you don't like the Freedom Caucus?
What I have observed is it really feels like they're promoting their brand of Christianity over actually substantive, I can say the word, legislation. And that's been, kind of my complaint, since they've begun is, like last year they had, or maybe it was earlier this year. Sorry, my years are running together. They had a House concurrent resolution that they passed declaring Christ as king. They also had a Senate concurrent resolution, I think it was SCR 8, where they wanted to call on the Supreme Court to overturn gay marriage.
Okay.
What that felt like to me was, like is declaring Christ as king.
Okay.
That feels like a violation to what the First Amendment says of the Constitution, where it specifies the, what does it say? No religious test shall ever be required, something as a qualification of, basically office.
Right.
Don't quote me on that. I don't have it exact,
No,
but
but I know what you mean. Yeah.
It's one of those things that, look, if I look at the legislation that they attempted to pass last year, it didn't really go anywhere. I don't see, and if I've missed something, please tell me, but I didn't see any legislation that had been passed by these folks that truly benefited Oklahomans. Like, I just think along the crisis rankings, right? Like what we're ranked in education, our incarceration rates. We also have an issue with, I think it's the leading cause of death for children or teenagers, I can't remember exactly which, is suicide. So when there's a crisis king, it's like, okay, that's great. What did that actually do? Where did that benefit Oklahomans? That's the part that I struggle with, is I would hope that the time spent in the legislature would be something that would benefit, help raise us up, versus I feel like what they're putting out there is very divisive.
Okay. Well, this is going to sound funny because this isn't really where we had our argument. We'll talk about that in a second. I actually, I actually agree with you on that.
Okay.
Because I'm a big separation of church and state person.
Yeah.
And for me,
then we definitely agree there, because that's a huge one for me.
Yeah. Well, but here's the way this always works with me. I pick a side and then people go, "Oh, that's great." But then they don't understand what the side is.
Right. How you define separation of church and state.
Exactly. So the reason I'm against separation of church and state is I don't want the state controlling religion. I don't care about religion controlling the state, because in my view, I would hope we would elect people who are, now I'm a Christian, obviously, so there you go, but are religious. Let's just say religious, not even Christian. Let's just say are religious and have a set of religious ethics. I think that's good. So I don't mind that. I just don't want the state controlling the church.
I don't want either controlling. I think that's probably where we differ. I don't want either controlling. I don't want government controlling religion, but I also don't want religion controlling government.
Okay, but this is a good point. So let me ask you this then.
Okay.
So I'm a Christian and I want to run for political office. Mm-hmm. So can I not keep my Christian beliefs and my ideals when I go into office?
I think, yeah. I mean, I feel like religion is a really important part of a lot of people's lives. Like that's what shapes that can be what shapes their their worldview, etc. And I think I don't expect anybody to walk into the state capitol and leave their religion at the door. I think where I struggle with it, as far as what I see from the Freedom Caucus, is it doesn't feel like they're representing everybody. It feels like they're only representing the folks that have the same religious alignment with them, and
Okay.
not Muslim or Buddhist or what have you. And I feel like, for me personally, I've benefited from working for these international companies where I've had a lot of exposure to folks that are of a religious faith that I had never been exposed to in the state of Oklahoma growing up here. And that was one thing that I've been also very fortunate that I've had people that I've worked with that have been very understanding, as far as I will ask somebody a zillion questions on their religion because I want to understand. For example, I worked with a lot of folks from India. They have arranged marriages there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't understand. Like, I just thought that was terrible. But you know what? Here's the thing. I've had so many conversations just on that one subject with folks that I've worked with. I'm not saying that I would ever subscribe to it, but based on the many conversations I've had, I understand why a lot of them do go that route. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And it was one of those, I had a gentleman that I worked with, we both worked oil and gas. And he explained to me that when he's in an arranged marriage, our kids were in swim lessons together. So it was, it made it a
No way, really?
Yeah. We had worked for the same company. And so we were there. So he and I actually had gone to a conference, and we pieced out and went and grabbed sushi together, and we were just chatting. And so I was asking him, I'm like, so tell me about arranged marriages. And so he gave me a really good explanation of it, just talking about, he's like, my parents know me better than anybody knows me. They understand what my values are. They, that type of thing. I personally, and I respected his position on it. I would be really afraid of who my parents would try to hook me up with. I don't think, not that I don't trust my parents, but I don't know. But I didn't grow up in that faith. So it's really hard for me to make that leap.
Yeah.
Although I think it would be, if you turn the tables, if there's something, I grew up as a Christian, I was raised in the Christian faith. I think there's things that potentially, that beliefs that Christians have that might seem out of the norm for someone that didn't grow up in that faith. And so I think, especially like when it comes to government, they should be representative, I feel like you should feel like you're being represented, whether or not you share the same religious beliefs as whoever your elected official is. And I don't get that sense from the folks that are in the Freedom Caucus.
Okay, well, again, it's kind of freaking me out because I can see that. I mean, and that does make some sense. And I will also tell you too, hold on one second.
Yeah.
I will tell you too, I agree with you. If we're going to go to the Capitol and we're going to propose legislation, whether we're removing it or making more, right?
Yeah.
It should benefit the most people, right? And I know a lot of people are, and I actually, as a Christian, I've actually gotten thumped about this numerous times. I know there is a group of people who believe that we are to bring about Christ's kingdom here. And we're going to do that through, legislation and other methods, but we're not, because you can't legislate morality. You can't legislate somebody into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that flat doesn't work.
No.
And I don't see the purpose for that. But there was one thing that you and I actually got into a huge conversation about that. And that was, you don't like the fact that they're private.
I don't. And then I think that goes back to, we talk about accountability and things like that. If I think about it from the private citizen standpoint. If I want to go and advocate for a particular piece of legislation, it would be helpful to know if they're members of that caucus. Just for my purposes of, if I want to go and engage them in conversation, it gives me a better idea of how exactly to engage them in conversation based on maybe that affiliation. The other thing that I take issue with is, why do they have to be, I mean, there's a few things, and you and I talked about this, because my thing was, why do they have to be secretive? Because my other thing too, and I think about this like, if I'm working corporate, right? I don't want somebody to be functioning in a job and not have, where they're not fully accountable for what they're bringing in to do that job, I guess. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but it's also, if you are aligned with this caucus, why wouldn't you declare that? Like, if there is something where you have folks that say, okay, I'm part of the Freedom Caucus, and they are being punished by their leadership, that should be raised. Whether or not I agree with the Freedom Caucus is irrelevant to that. But my part is, if we're really going to say that we want to legislate in a way, we want accountability, we want everything else, if I am afraid to declare something because I'm afraid that my leadership is going to, punish me in some way, I think that is something that's a different conversation. If we have legislators that truly feel like that, we should be addressing that. I don't know. Does that make sense? I mean,
it does. And then, and I wrote back at one point and I said, here are things that we neglect to think about, though, as you're thinking about transparency and accountability with the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
We have a Democratic caucus, and I actually, even though there are several that I definitely don't agree with in there, I bless their hearts. There are so few of them. I'm like, hey, guys, I mean, I give you so many points for being real, because we have so many on our side that are rhinos. So, I'm like, hey, way to be real. But they have a Democratic caucus and we have a Republican caucus. And what happens and I'll just talk about ours in Republican caucus, it's like Vegas. What happens in Republican caucus stays in Republican caucus.
Yeah.
Well, how is that fair to any of the rest of us who would like to know what happened in there? And why do we have a caucus? Because when I elect you, you're not going to the state capitol to represent a group of Republicans. You're going to represent me, the voter. It's an individual thing. That's our contract, is an individual contract. It's not a group thing. So that's kind of where I push back a little bit at that, because I was like, well, but if you're going to say, but hey, they don't have accountability if they're not going to say who they are. Well, we know who they are in Republican caucus, but we don't know what the hell they're doing in there.
Well, and I mean, I think that's a fair point. And that's the thing, is like, if we're talking about Democrat or Republican caucus, either one, we don't know all the details of what's going on inside that room, but we do know who's in the room.
Yes.
I think that was kind of my point with the Freedom Caucus. I'm not going to know everything that they're going to be talking about behind closed doors, but I would like to know who's in the conversation. That's the part that I feel like that we're kind of,
yeah, we're kind of in an impasse, because I'm kind of like, I don't even care necessarily who you are. I just want to know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, Freedom Caucus, because it started national, right?
Yes, it did. Yeah.
What do they have, like 13 or 14 in the states?
Something, yeah.
Ish.
Well, and they have one, federally as well.
Yeah, and I think that was, on the other aspect of it, is they have their own agenda at the federal level. Does that align with what we want for Oklahoma? I don't know.
Oh, I see. So I think what I'm hearing you say is it's really more a concern about their agenda. And the only way to know their agenda is to kind of know who the people are that are involved and know who you're dealing with. Is that where I'm going?
I think that's part of it. Yeah. I mean,
okay.
And that's the whole thing, is I feel like, and there's a lot of things that you have written that I am 100% like, I'm like at my computer and I'll be reading something. I'm like, yes. But a lot of it is based on either accountability, where I feel like you and I are aligned on a lot of
Yeah,
those things,
I
regardless
agree.
of party.
Mhm.
And I think things that you have pointed out, especially and I'm so glad you turned me on to your stuff on STIT. Loved it. But are they representing us, or are they representing, are they representing the national agenda? I don't know. But like I said, from what I see come out of them, or what I have seen come out of them for Oklahoma, it just seems very divisive. It doesn't. It kind of feels like there's time wasted on performance and not substance, as far as over the last year. And I'm hoping that changes over this next year. My whole goal is, regardless of the legislation that's passed, is that it's something that's good for Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen those types of things come out of that group yet, unless I overlook something. I mean,
Well, and let me go back. Let me throw this back in. I got sick of us not being able to see each other because of whatever the heck
I know.
that formatting thing is doing. Okay, so we just talked about that is the secret membership.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about, because you mentioned the religious legislation, the Christ is King thing.
Yeah.
And again, I got to tell you, I'm in agreement with you there on that one too. I just don't, I mean,
Dang it.
I don't know why we have to, that's what you do in your personal life. But again, I don't think it's the state's job to make those statements. That doesn't mean that if I'm a Christian and I get elected to office, I'm not going to talk about Jesus, because I will.
No, I
And
mean, and
in
that's
the
the thing
Capitol.
is,
But
like,
I agree with you. I think
yeah,
just making blanket statements like that is really almost to the point of obnoxious, because what's the point really?
right.
Except, like you said, to poke people in the nose that aren't Christians. I don't know.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the anti-abortion measures.
What would you like to talk about the
Well,
anti?
it says 3 bills by Senator Dusty Deaver seeking to create covenant marriages, restrict divorce, and equate abortion to murder all failed in committee. But this was important to you because he is a member of the Freedom Caucus,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus. And
Okay.
that would, the other thing that I would say about that is on abortion measures. And I know this isn't going to be popular, but I look at that as women's health.
Right.
That's a woman's issue. I've always been frustrated when men, chime in on that. I think it would be, I don't know how it would be. I'd be curious as how that would be received if the tables were turned. We talk about having control of our own bodies, that type of thing. That's a big deal. That's a huge deal to me and a lot of folks. I think there's a lot of edge cases that happen with abortion that our folks in the legislature, I don't care, our legislator, anybody else's legislator, that they don't necessarily have every single they don't have the understanding of what they would need in order to legislate on that.
Okay. Well, I'm very, very, very pro baby.
Yeah. And you know what? Here's the thing.
I'm very pro baby. So I
Yeah.
am not, and I have family members who have had abortions. I mean, and I'm not the Christian who is going to look, down on somebody, for what they do. But for my purposes,
Sure.
as a Christian, one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not kill.
Mhm.
Well, if you feel squeamish about aborting a bunch of puppies, then you should feel way more squeamish about getting rid of a human baby. So I tend to believe that one of the things that government, this is just me, this is where I tend to believe that one of the things that government is responsible for doing is the protection of life, because that's, what we say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Sure.
So if we're going to talk about life, then it's going to be babies, but it's also going to be elderly people as well, right? So taking care of
Yeah.
our older population and protecting them. So while I'm not a huge let's get government to do it, and I do not believe that government can legislate morality, I
Yeah.
do believe we can protect people's lives. And I believe that that starts at conception. So as soon as that little cell starts becoming a blastula and a gastrula and all of those things, it's off to the races to become a baby. So
Sure.
my aim is to protect that child. And if we have to use government to do that, that's the one thing government is supposed to do, is to protect life.
I would say that there's no protection for the woman's life in some of those scenarios.
Okay.
And that's the part that I struggle with. You know, the whole thing of letting government make the medical decisions, I think, is tough, right? Whether it's abortion or anything else, I think that's a tough thing to ask them to legislate. I think as far as, you know, abortion goes, I think the right should be there. I mean, you know, as you said, we can't legislate morality. The challenges, I think, on that side is, you know, I've had a couple babies. That's not a small procedure. You know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I was fortunate that I didn't have those situations. I have Crohn's disease, and so that was one of those things that I had to plan ahead to make sure that I had a plan in place that didn't do more damage to me than what I already have going on. And
bless your heart.
Yeah, and so it's one of those things that you know, I've just seen too many folks that have had some type of complication or some type of challenge with that I would hate to see them lose access to that, to be able to abort one. I had a guy that I worked with. This is probably one of the most heartbreaking things ever. He and his wife had been married for a while. They finally decided to start a family. She got pregnant, and I think it was in the second trimester, she was diagnosed with an extremely aggressive form of breast cancer.
Oh, yeah.
They
There have been those stories. Yep.
Yeah, and so they had to make the choice whether they abort the baby and save her life, or she goes ahead and has the baby, and she will definitely lose her life. And the other piece of it was, not only, you know, they aborted the child, she can't have any kids after that. You know, who can see that coming? It's just one of those things that there's a lot of gray areas, I think, for abortion, that a lot of us are maybe not privy to, or we haven't experienced it, or we don't know what those different challenges are. I think that's, I don't know. I just think it's such a hard, it is such a hard topic for folks to discuss and not get really upset about it. And there's passion on both sides. You know, I really strongly do believe that has to be a decision that's made between a woman and her physician. I don't feel like anybody else should be involved in that. I think that on a lot of, you know, I've made medical decisions based on, you know, they gave you the options that you can choose, and then you have to, you know, use your best judgment. The same thing when my husband was diagnosed with cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer right after I had my first child. And so we had, I think, even within that situation, and that was a thing too, and I think that one really shaped me, as far as I no longer think that my physician has all of the answers.
I got that during COVID.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in this particular situation, I won't go into all of the ins and outs, but the first doctor that we went to, I'm trying to think of when he was diagnosed. They called us on a Friday and told us he had cancer, and we had to go to the doctor's office on Monday. And this guy, and I'm like 10 days out from having my first child. So I was insane from all of the hormonal changes. And
that's shocking.
My husband got diagnosed with cancer. So I was extra crazy.
Yeah.
So we were in the office and this guy did a really, he had a Sharpie and he was drawing through like, we're going to cut this out and this out and this out. And they call it the anchor surgery. So they cut him open here and then across.
Oh, good Lord.
Really bloody surgery.
Oh my goodness.
But I was scared to death. And of course I'm just like, let's get it scheduled. Let's get you in there. And my husband was like, let's just hold on just a minute. And as a result of all these other weird, stars that aligned, we came across proton therapy, which is what my husband had, which didn't require surgery, which didn't require the physician here that we initially went to acted like he had never heard of it before.
Yikes.
We ended up going out to, at the time, they only had a couple places in the United States that had it. So he went out to California, Loma Linda, California, where they pioneered it. They eventually brought it here. But what was interesting is why he's out there. The original physician called me one evening while my husband was out cancer treatment, and he knew all about proton therapy, and he offered to do any of his follow-up appointments. And I thought, you asshole. I mean, but that's the thing is, they don't come. When people come into the room for medical procedure, what have you, I'm not going to assume that that physician has 100% of my best interests at heart.
Well, and I can see your point. Gracie said, I think we can all agree that doctors don't have all of the answers. And, John Boy made a comment, and this is weird. Something is off on this program today. I don't know what it is. Like, how big does that have to be? My Lord. They've done something. How many times has a man wanted the child and the woman did away with it? Is that not wrong? Because it took two to make one. So, but I don't want to get bogged down in the abortion argument because, the thing is, okay, so you said, and let me throw this in so people could see it again. So here is another thing. Controversial stances generate headlines, not results. They released inflammatory statements about protesters blocking streets, claiming drivers wouldn't be. Now, this was the legislation they put in, I think 2 years ago, when we were having all of that situation where you had protesters who were actually blocking people in the street. And then if they tried to get around and they hit somebody accidentally, they'd be in trouble. And so that was something that they were trying to stop. And then challenged a national coming out day event at Tinker Air Force Base, calling it vulgar or prurient, filed bills to establish memorials to Charlie Kirk on campuses and declare Charlie Kirk Free Speech Day. Okay, so let me say, I don't agree that number one I don't think it's fair for somebody to block the road and then you can't get around. You've got as much right to use that road as anybody else. Your taxes pay for that. So there's no reason somebody should be in the road. That's the public safety issue. And if I'm going to drive there, I should have the right to drive it. I pay for it. And you can't get in my way and then me try to get around and then sue me for hitting you, or I get a ticket or, whatever for hitting you. You shouldn't be in the road. So to me, that was the reason behind that particular part of legislation. And as for the National Coming Out Day, you're going to laugh when I say this. So the National Coming Out Day event at Tinker Air Force Base is a big no. And the reason why is that's tax dollars. Big no. We're not going to play the game of, social whatever that is on the public dime. That's just not, that's my perspective. That's a big no.
Sure.
But then when you said file bills to establish memorials on Charlie Kirk, I think that's stupid. That's absolutely ludicrous. Why waste the time, money, everything else to do that? That's silly. So I'm in complete agreement with you on that. But as for the National Coming Out Day on Tinker Air Force Base, and that I'll have to tell you, I'll have to fight you on that one because I don't want tax dollars going for that. Okay. And I don't want to be sponsored on public right-of-ways or at a public venue or at a public. I don't think it's good for kids.
I think, well, I disagree with you on the thing for kids.
Okay.
On the first point, on blocking the traffic. I think the part that bothers me, because, you know, if you go back years and years ago, everybody protested. That's kind of an American thing, right? I'm certainly not, you know, I'm not stating that anybody that protests, we should all just go block the streets and screw everybody else. And I don't care if you can get through on the street. I don't subscribe to that. But I do think it is a very American thing. I think the part that bothered me was that when our local Freedom Caucus came out and was basically saying like, hey, if you run over any protesters, you know, you're going to be fined or something like that.
So you were feeling like that meant if I went up over the curb just to run over a protest?
No, I just meant like, so for example, I'm trying to think of which one it was. It might have been, I can't remember if it was April or June. It was right before one of the No Kings protests. And
okay.
The folks, and I'm very familiar with the folks that are planning that, etc. They go ahead and in advance and get a permit. They had a permit for a brief march going to City Hall, that type of thing. They had the whole route approved, all of that. Everybody followed the protocols. We didn't have any complaints from what I recall.
Okay.
Of any blocks or anything like that.
Okay.
It just felt more as a, well, if you see anything, it was more of a like, well, if you see somebody in the street, you have the right to run them over. And that's what it felt like. And I think the part that was bothersome is then seeing additional comments on social media where people were, you know, basically taking that and just being like, yeah, watch out, I'm going to be, you know, lead foot or that kind of thing. And it's,
oh, I see what you're saying.
I hate that stuff. I'm one of those, like, if somebody wants to protest something, that is your right as an American. That is such an American thing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in curtailing anybody's free speech. And if you want to go put a placard on and go run around in the public right of way, that's fine, but not in the street.
Yeah. Well,
just not in the street.
I mean, we can go back and look at all of the different protests that have happened where they've, you know, you have like the labor protests and, you know, type of stuff where they really caused a stir and it affected change. I mean, maybe we're seeing another revolution of that, but I hate to think that somebody just ran over somebody just because. I would hope they wouldn't do that. I mean, the loss of life, I'm not going to drive over somebody just because they're protesting something that I don't agree with and I want to get through on the road. I'll be pissed. I would be irritated. I'm not going to say that wouldn't be really frustrating. Absolutely, that would be frustrating. But I would never want to encourage or infer that I've encouraged folks to hit the gas and whatever happens, happens.
Well, no. And I completely understand you. But I don't know if you watch European politics at all, but Europe has had an absolutely ungodly, I mean, their climate change people group, I don't know what you want to call them, but people who are in the, you know, climate change is going to kill us all group. Mm-hmm. They do the whole lying down in streets, and they do the whole lying down on highways and that kind of thing. And it's not fair. It's not right to people who have to go to work for a living and actually have to, you know, go to a job, or if there's an emergency, my God, what if there's an ambulance that needs to come through and you got a whole bunch of people lying down in the street and they don't get up for that kind of stuff. I've seen it, you know, in videos from the UK for sure. So, yeah. I mean, I'm all for the protesting, but just not in the street. I'm just going to say. And yeah. So to me, it makes perfect sense to say, look, you know, if you're going to protest in the street, which you shouldn't be doing, and we've already said you shouldn't be there. If you're going to do that, then people have to move, and whatever happens, happens. And then at that point, it's the people who should take responsibility for themselves and say, you know what? I can tell the government to F off if I get on the sidewalk.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
And then the other one that like I said, I agreed with you about the Charlie Kirk thing. That's obnoxious. And I don't see the point in wasting our time for that. But as to go back to the coming out day on Tinker, Tinker Air Force Base, that's all paid for by taxpayers.
Yeah.
And if we're not going to, if you're going to object, if we had some National Catholic Day or something on Tinker Air Force Base or, whatever, then we have to object to having a National Coming Out Day at Tinker Air Force Base. So my thought is just let's leave all of that. Again, it's free speech and whatever, but not on the public dime.
I don't have a problem with the tax argument. I agree with that.
Good.
Like, to me, I'm good with that. I would look at other events that were happening and want to make sure that we're using the same lens on whatever events are out there. I'm not looking into it. I didn't look into it, but I don't have a problem with that. I think that's fair.
But I think you're right. We do need to watch for that. And we're not going to have a National Catholic Religion Day on the Air Force Base either. So you're right. I think we need to, apply those. And unfortunately, we're coming to the point where we're going to have to get off for today, which I hate, but can't do anything about that.
No problem.
And so what I'm going to say is next when we get together again on the 27th, so not the next Monday, but the Monday after, we'll pick up where we left off. And I'm going to put this blog back up there before we get off here today, because I want people to be able to see your Substack. And it's not a blog. It's called a Substack. I don't know what difference it makes, but but if you look for a blog, you're not going to find Jen Expletive's blog. You're going to find Jen Expletive's Substack. So I do want to make sure that you find that, because again, Christy, I do think you've got the thing about the jail thing absolutely needs to be read by people.
I'm telling you what, that made my blood boil when I just got through everything that I got through on that.
Yeah.
I would urge anybody to just get familiar with all of the ins and outs of that whole deal.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I want you guys to go see your blog. So next time when we get together, you and I will finish the Oklahoma Freedom Caucus. But again, I want people to realize once we've talked this out, I mean, we still have some differences, but it's not the end of the world. And again, it isn't that why we decided we were going to do this?
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about it briefly before. And I said, I think it's important that we find the places that we agree on. That's the easy stuff, right? But the things that we don't agree on, I think it's really important that we have a conversation like we're having now and really listen to each other. Because what I'd said to you prior is we have a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot of lived experiences that are different, that shaped the way that we view something. And I think, and again, I don't necessarily think that we're going to come to agreement on some of those things, but I think there's the respect for understanding why we came to those.
I agree, because in an increasingly violent world, violence doesn't solve the issue.
No.
And I'm going to say this one more time. They don't want you and me talking.
No.
Because if you and I talk, then we'll find ways to work our problems out while still maintaining our own, our own belief set. But we can do that. Mm-hmm. So it's so important to do this, because we don't want to play into the elitist game of let's get them all fighting so that we win in the end. No. Most of us are in the middle, and let's put the big middle finger up to those people and say, no, we're going to figure out a way to work our differences out in a reasonable way that makes sense for both of us. So that's all we're trying to do here.
That's right.
Well, Christy, it's been a blessing to chat with you again today. And I can't wait until weekend, Monday after next. And then we'll come back and we'll finish this discussion up and see where we end up. But thank you again. And thank you guys for being with us today. So appreciate it. And we'll meet up with you again in week after next. Thanks for being with us.
See you soon.
All righty. Bye.
All right. Bye.